welcome to another weekly update. I hope you're doing well. Hope you had a good week last week, the big week of Microsoft Ignite, the big week of AI, the big week of Copilot, kind of as we expected, I think. A lot of the news and the announcements were very focused on Copilot and AI and what Microsoft is doing in that area. I always feel a little bit for all those teams that are working on some really, really cool stuff right now that isn't AI related, because certainly all this year and second half of last year as well, AI is taking the oxygen out of the room a little bit, but that's okay. It is actually really good to see Microsoft laser focused on one thing and seeing the whole company pull in one direction. And actually it is a testament to what the company can do when the whole company does pull together in one direction, because some of the stuff that got announced and some of the stuff we saw, really amazing, really cool. So yeah, I think it was all good. All right, we're going to ease in. I've got 4 different blog posts to talk through that I put out last week from covering some of the announcements at Ignite, and it's nowhere near all of the announcements at Ignite. And to be honest with you, I'm still going through the session content from Ignite. So there's going to be more stuff that comes out from there, but there's 4 things that I want to talk about. And then there's 2 new things that maybe did get announced at Ignite or talked about at Ignite, and I just haven't found them yet. But there are other blog posts that I've seen covered elsewhere, and they've kind of shown up in different RSS feeds and stuff as well. So I kind of want to talk about those as well, because you might have missed them because they weren't headline announcements at Ignite. So let's get into it. First thing I want to talk about is Azure Communication Services. Often I start with Microsoft 365 stuff and team stuff and then go into Azure Communication Services. I'm going to do it slightly differently this time around. I'm going to talk about Azure Communication Services first, because they have made 2 things generally available at Ignite this year. They've made their AI speech service, or AI speech in call automation capabilities, and their job router capability, both generally available. So this is really interesting. So I've talked about both of these before. If you've been to any of my sessions that I've done at conferences and stuff like that, I like to demo certainly the AI speech stuff. I don't think I've done any demos of the job router stuff, but I do use it, and it's really useful. So let's talk through what those things are first, and then you'll see why it's useful that they are now GA, because they've been in preview for a little while. AI speech is the one that's been in preview probably the shortest amount of time, and that makes it really easy for you to do both text to speech and speech to text. So both speaking out the text, but also recognizing spoken text in the context of call automation in Azure Communication Services. So call automation is the thing that lets you have code, it can be serverless code, Azure Functions, for instance, running in response to an incoming phone call that can be a PSTN call, so a PSTN line, or an incoming ACS call. Allows you to perform that kind of speech recognition and also do TTS. So you could absolutely have done these things without this being in place, because you could, capture the audio, ship it off to a service, or generate audio from the text to speech, from text, and then ship that, from a service and then play it back into the media. You could have done those things. This makes it super easy to do. This makes it built into Azure Communication Services. It uses Azure's cognitive services. It's all built inside Azure. It's all easy to use. It's all built into the SDKs. Very, very straightforward to use. It really is like 1 or 2 lines. Especially the speech recognition, I think, is really powerful the way it's been implemented, because they've implemented it using the same flows and the same architecture that they use for the rest of the eventing that happens in call automation. So it's a kind of entirely serverless model where you get incoming events and you respond to events. What they've done is wrap that in. So once you turn on speech recognition, you just get an event to say, like, here's some new speech that's been recognized. What do you want to do with it? Which is really powerful. It's almost as simple as dealing with the DTMF tones, actually. So that's really cool. Job router is the other one. That's very much an abstraction over something that you could do today, but it's the Azure Communication Services team, I guess, say, well, this is something that we know lots of people do, so why don't we make our version of it and make an abstraction, and then everyone doesn't have to build the same thing, which I think is a good idea. I think it's cool. And so job router is the ability to basically route calls to things, or it doesn't have to be calls. Route one thing, assign jobs to a resource, a finite set of resources. The most common use case is calls in a contact center. Like if you think about that model, how do you route calls to agents in a contact center? That's really the thing that job router is trying to solve. But obviously you could use it to associate jobs to factory machines or any number of other things. So it's a nice abstraction. It's not super complicated particularly. I think it's a fairly thin abstraction over like a service bus queue, if I'm honest. But it is nicely built into Azure Communication Services. It's nicely built into the way that Azure Communication Services deals with incoming calls and all the rest of it. So it is kind of nice in that respect, in that everything's in the same SDK. You haven't got to go and build it all yourself. So it's nice for that. So both of those things are, well, almost generally available, sorry. They're going to be GA this year. So the Azure AI speech stuff is going to be GA later this month, and Job Router is going to be GA early December. So both of them just about made the cut for Ignite, I think, and just about justified the GA this month, or GA now, into Ignite, because they're so close. So definitely worth keeping an eye on if you do anything with Azure Communication Services. And yeah, shout out to my talk that's coming up in a couple of weeks' time, actually, in Amsterdam, where I'm going to be talking about some of this stuff. All right, let's talk about a great new thing for developers, a great new capability that Microsoft are offering for Microsoft 365 developers, which really addresses something we've been talking about as a group for a little while, ever since we knew Copilot was coming out and we knew what the extensibility model for Copilot was going to be. Lots of us were asking, well, how do we build extensions for Copilot? How do we test those extensions if we don't have Copilot for Microsoft 365? If we don't have Copilot enabled on our Microsoft 365 tenant because it's too expensive, because we don't qualify, because we're not an enterprise customer, whatever the reasons. And so Microsoft have announced a new offering for ISVs, for indie developers, for anyone building Copilot plugins. So there's going to be a developer sandbox for Copilot for Microsoft 365, a Copilot for 365 developer sandbox. This is great news. This is exciting. If I had a big siren button, I would push it now, because this is this is one that is worth keeping a really close eye on. If you're doing development in Copilot, Copilot plugins or anything like that, you are going to need this. And I think Microsoft have realized that actually they want people to build plugins for Copilot. And so if they want to make that happen, they do need to give developers the tools they need to build and test those plugins. So this is early days for this sandbox. It's currently in a private preview. Right now, you should be able to get it, or you soon will be able to get it if you already have Copilot for Microsoft 365. Which is interesting, because initially I was like, well, surely those people are the people that need it least, because they've already got Copilot in their tenant. But actually, if you think about it, the people that have Copilot in their tenant right now for Microsoft 365 are those really big enterprises. And those really big enterprises don't like developers building things in their production environment. They tend to have their own development environment and their test environments, and those won't be Copilot enabled. So it's the same problem. Anyway, it's currently in private preview. If you have Copilot in any of your tenants, if you're a Copilot customer, then you get priority on this. If you're in the Microsoft 365 TAP, which is the Technology Adoption Technology Adoption Program, you get priority on it as well. So I don't know what this is going to cost. I don't know what the commitments are going to be. I don't know whether you can buy a month at a time, whether you have to buy a year up front, or you have to buy 5 years. Excuse me. But I think it's really, really good that Microsoft are even thinking about this at all. I think it's good that, I think this is a problem that needed to be addressed. And I think doing it in this way makes an awful lot of sense. We actually also don't know, I didn't put this in the blog post, but we don't really know what form that sandbox is going to take. Is it going to be a pre-populated sandbox that is kind of, if you're thinking about Microsoft and building these large language models against tenants, that's probably, I would guess, quite expensive to build it against that corpus of data that is in your tenant. So maybe what they're going to do is take a fully hydrated test tenant with test data, build the large language model against that, and then lock it in time and say, this is what you guys need to test on. Like, this is the data, this is the LLM, and it can't change. That kind of makes sense. I get that. That would unblock developers to test everything I think they need to test for extensions. So I wouldn't be against that, especially if it brings down the price. Or it may be that it's actually a fully working instance in a tenant, and they've just managed to kind of jump through the hoops and whatever it is to make it so that we can get access to it. But anyway, I think this is really good. Thanks to the team. I know there's work that would have had to have gone on to make this happen in the background to justify its existence. So thank you to the team for making that happen. I think it's really cool. Okay, on that theme actually of building plugins for Copilot for Microsoft 365, I feel like we need a better name than Copilot for Microsoft 365 because it's such a tongue twister and it's such a long thing to say every time. But every time I say Copilot, in my head, I feel like I need to check myself because that word has become instantly overused. And I get why Microsoft are using Copilot as the same term for everything. I think it's smart, but it does get really confusing where we have Copilot meaning so many different things now. Anyway, this blog post or this piece of information is around those Copilot for Microsoft 365 plugins. It's going to be easier to manage and develop them now. So there's a new program for publishing, which is now called Microsoft 365 and Copilot. It looks like just a name change. It looks like it just replaces the old Microsoft 365 program in Partner Center, but it means there's a place now to go and publish your Copilot plugins, and also means that they will then show up, they get tagged as Copilot plugins, meaning that admins on the front end of tenants can then see them in one place. They'll be able to identify which of those things in the App Store are for Microsoft Copilot, for Microsoft 365. So I think that's good. There's a whole session on it at Ignite if you want more information. I've done the blog post here. You can see you can see all the data and all the details on it. So I think that's really good. As I also noticed that my screen share is not screen sharing anymore because that's not what I wanted you to see. Yeah, you're still seeing the old one, so that's a bit of a pain. We could try and fix it in real time. Maybe we will. I might just click around a bit and see if I can't fix it. That probably also means that you didn't even see my blog post around the Copilot sandbox either, so that's such a pain, isn't it? All right, let's try and fix it in real time because that's fun, isn't it? All right, so let's do this, and let's do this, and then let's do this, and then let's do this. Okay, so now you can see my Copilot sandbox blog post, which would have made more sense when I was talking about the Copilot sandbox, but never mind. But now you can see my my one around managing plugins for Microsoft Copilot. So yeah, like I say, there's an Ignite session for this. So if that sounds interesting, it's kind of small news, but it's good to know that all parts of that kind of ecosystem of publishing are all moving forward in lockstep, which is nice. Hey, Oz, thanks for letting me know. I think you and I realised about the same time. Sorry about that. I'm looking at 3 different versions of the blog post. I'm looking at the one on my screen that is being shared. I'm looking at OBS's output of like what I'm streaming, and then I'm also looking at the stream, which is like 30 seconds delayed. So, hey ho, but I think we're all good now. We'll see how it goes. So, yeah, we talked about that. So what else is there to talk about? Let's one more piece of Ignite news, and then I want to talk about a few things that are not, well, they are kind of Ignite related, but I don't see them come out as big Ignite announcements. The last thing I want to talk about is the Microsoft Teams AI library. We've definitely talked about this before, so I shall be kind of quick, but it is now generally available, which is great news. They've moved really quickly on that from kind of inception to build to GA. And really it's having its moment, good timing. And yeah, that's now, it's GA for JavaScript and .NET. I think the other stuff is going to come maybe a bit later. Right, let's see if you can see this blog post. Yes, you can. Fantastic. All right. So this one, if you haven't heard about it before, I think it's going to become the new way to build bots on top of the bot framework for Microsoft Teams. I think it's a nice way of doing it. If you're building a bot today, definitely have a look at this, especially if that bot is going to talk to an LLM, because there's a real abstraction that goes on between how Teams works, how bot framework works, and how you would talk to an LLM. That it makes this kind of super easy to use. If you're putting it and backporting it into an existing bot framework bot, it is going to be harder, and that as it like the scaffolding as it comes, it's probably not for you. I maybe start with a new project, fully understand what the Teams AI library is doing, and then consider which parts you want to take and lift onto your existing bot, or vice versa, what you want to bring into a new version of your bot, because it is a different way about thinking about how you build bots. Really, what you do with the Teams AI library is you have your large language model, you generate a prompt, for how your users will talk to your bot, how your bot will respond, and all that sort of stuff. But then you also define actions, and then you write the code for those actions. So it's a real abstraction over everything about the bot, apart from doing your own business logic, which is really nice, but it is kind of a very different way about thinking of things. So it might make sense to kind of start off with a new version of your bot that is more based around the Teams AI library, and then just bring over the business logic of whatever it is your bot does, authorizing holiday or booking a flight or whatever, those kind of clear business logic functions, bring those parts over and then hook them up to actions that take place in the Teams AI library. So that's the Teams AI library. And I think something happened whilst they were building the Teams AI library that is the reason for one of the other things I'm going to talk about at the end. But just before I do, this is really cool, actually. And I think got launched, so November 14th was, Ignite timeframe as well. So it came out with Ignite, but I didn't actually see it mentioned anywhere, which is a new chat component in the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. So what is this? So Microsoft Graph Toolkit, we've definitely talked about before. A nice way for developers to interact with Microsoft Graph in a nice way if they're building kind of front ends and you want it to look like it was built as a kind of Microsoft-y product, and kind of looks like it looks and gels with other Microsoft products and it's got that look and feel. But also if you want the abstraction of not having to deal with writing your own people picker or profile card or all those sort of things, it's a really quick way of dropping functionality into your applications. And they've just released a chat component that allows you to embed Microsoft Teams chat into your application. So this is something people have been asking for. I know people have been asking for this because they've asked me about it. So this is in public preview right now. So it's cool. Like it's a great idea. I'm not going to play the video. You can go and find the blog post and play the video. Links for the blog post will be in the description for whatever it is you're watching. Probably about 10 minutes after I finish recording, because that's how it works. But look, you can see it here. This is embedded. This is not Teams, but it's in some other website. A lot of the nice functionality around people joining, leaving the participant list, all this sort of stuff. It's got a pretty rich canvas for displaying images and GIFs and emojis and all the rest of it, which is really nice. You can create new chats. It doesn't just have to be an existing one. The only thing I would like some more detail on is the cost. So I think this is an interesting conversation we should have, because this is something you could build yourself, and you have all the bits in place to build yourself. You have subscriptions, you have API calls you could make. You could develop this yourself, but it is a bit of a pain, and this component absolutely makes a lot of that easier. If you build it yourself, you are going to pay something for it because you are using the subscription. You'll need to use present subscription. You'll need to use chat subscriptions to make sure it is quite fast. You can't just do this by polling, I don't think. And a lot of those APIs now are chargeable. Depending on who you are, what tenant you have, how many users you have, there's a lot to work through there about whether you actually pay real money, because a lot of the E-licenses, the E3, E5, they come with seeded capacity, meaning your first X number of calls are free. or included, I should say. But at some level, somebody pays, and that, by the sound of it, is also going to be the case for this, because there is a little line somewhere towards the end of this blog post which says, this feature takes advantage of real-time endpoints, high-capacity APIs, and is subject to the same billing model described in the payment models and licensing requirements for Microsoft Teams APIs. So those are the same things that I was talking about if you're going to build it yourself. Endpoints, high-capacity APIs. What I don't know is exactly what that pricing is going to be. So because this is an abstraction, we don't really know how many endpoints they're subscribed to, how many API calls they're making, how often they're making them, what they're making them for. So we can't accurately map or predict the usage and therefore the cost of these APIs or anything for using this toolkit. So I think I would like to see, and I think we will see, a follow-up to this blog post that gives a bit more detail to allow developers and administrators to more accurately forecast the cost of usage of this component. There's probably I think it's fairly easy to work out, but it's quite hard for us to work out on the outside, if you like. This is the flip side of using abstraction of a component, where you've got these components in the Graph Toolkit that undoubtedly save us a bunch of time because we didn't write them, so we can just drop them in and benefit from the functionality. The flip side there is that we don't really know how they're put together, so it's very hard for us to accurately predict costs. I think it would be great to have some kind of wrap-up blog post that says, if you put this in and there's a chat between, 3 people for this long or this many messages, rough costs are this. Because then I think company organizations and developers and teams could plan, what does that mean for me and for my use case? So all in all, though, I think this is a good thing. It's good that they're doing it. You don't have to use it. That's the other thing. If you wanted to roll your own, you absolutely could. But maybe you just use this as like a North Star, if you like, for, this is the sort of thing we're aiming for. This is what we think it could look like. All right, and finally, I said when I was talking about the Teams AI library stuff that I think maybe it inspired something else. And that's this, which I didn't see any mention of at Ignite, but again, I haven't been through all the sessions, so that might just be me. And that's the Teams app test tool. I also haven't seen a marketing blog post for this. It's just kind of shown up in the docs. So I'm going to be doing a blog post about this later today because I think it's really interesting. So I've talked before, if you're building a bot for Microsoft Teams, you've got a couple of tools that you can use to help you whilst you're building. You've got the bot framework emulator, and then more and more Microsoft have done work in the Teams toolkit to make it easier to debug in Teams. But it's a bit clunky and a bit of a process to hit debug in Visual Studio Code, and then it automate that process of deploying, setting up, installing, sideloading an app in Teams so that you can use it in that Teams environment. And the reason we do that is because the Teams environment is so different from the bot framework emulator, because the bot framework emulator is not Teams. The bot framework emulator is bot framework, and then bot framework goes and becomes like the bot framework is the thing on the bottom of the stack, and then maybe you add in your channel to go to Microsoft Teams, which adds in a completely different way of dealing, a whole different set, additional events, additional capabilities on top of that core bot framework stuff, because you've got other channels you could use bot framework for as well. You can write in bot framework and publish out to the web, but WhatsApp, like a million different things. Doesn't always have to be Teams. But if you go into Teams and it is Teams, then you have additional events and you have additional data as well about the conversation that you're having. And that's always been hard to get out of the bot framework emulator because it's operating at like the level beneath the Teams conversation, if you like. Anyway, there's a new tool. Somebody inside Microsoft, some team, for whatever reason, have built the Teams app test tool. It feels a little bit like they built this internally because of the Teams AI library, because they needed a bit more functionality, they needed those events, and they felt that pain that we had, that we've been feeling for years, really. They kind of started to feel that pain and thought, actually, we should do something about this. I don't know what the reason was, but regardless of what the reason was, I'm very happy this exists. This is like another emulator, but it's an emulator that more closely describes the Microsoft Teams environment. So you don't need to do any tunneling. You don't need to register your app, your bot in Teams or anything like that. You don't need to sideload. This is like a cut down Teams renderer, and I think that's really cool. It's a completely sandboxed environment. It will surface a lot of the Teams specific events, which I think is really cool. There's a whole bunch to understand and go through here. You've got prerequisites for how to, before you can use it, understanding how to deploy it. It's built into Teams Toolkit as well, which is fantastic. So you're going to start seeing it. Where's the picture I'm looking for? Blah, blah. This is just setting up a bot. Here you go. You're going to start seeing it here, say debug in test tool, which I think is cool. It opens out in a web page. Yeah, I mean, it looks quite a lot like the bot framework emulator, but yeah, it's got this additional like made for Teams look and feel to it. And yeah, you can mock things like activity triggers. So things like it being installed in Teams. So this is so useful. Conversation updates, being able to trigger these. So useful, and not something that you can do in bot framework. I'm saying this is so useful because I have real world experience of this. I do this quite a lot. I did it last week, and it is a real pain. Like, you end up writing just code to spit out, like, send messages back to like you as a user just to get notifications about what's happening on update events, because you don't get any visibility until you deploy into Teams. So this is really cool. There's a whole bunch of stuff it can't do, and a whole bunch of interesting places where they might add functionality later. It's pretty basic for sending and receiving messages. It does a passable job of adaptive cards, but it doesn't have full support. There's some meeting view, like stage view stuff it doesn't do, full width stuff. But I mean, I'll take all this. Like, this is great. I think this is a really nice new addition to the tool set. And so I'm going to be talking about it for a while, because I want people to know it exists. We haven't had a lot of new tooling into the Microsoft Teams developer platform for a while. So I think it's really good to see this. I'm really pleased it exists. Thank you to the team for building it, but doubly thank you for doing that extra work to take it from like an internal tool to something that we can all use, because it's going to be super, super useful. And we're very grateful. I'm very grateful, certainly, because I can sort of see how this will make things better daily for developers, because it directly addresses a pain point, directly addresses a pain point that I know is real, because I've felt it. All right, I've been talking for nearly half an hour, and so I think I should stop. I mean, it's been a busy week, and last week's been a busy week anyway with Ignite. I expect there'll be more stuff coming as I get through the Ignite sessions and discover more things. So look out for those, look out for the blog posts. But thanks very much for making it to the end, if indeed you did. And have a great week, whatever it is you're doing. And I will speak to you again next time.